With the many layers you're going to create as you start composing your Photoshop images, it's great to have the layers panel and also layers menu to help you manage all of that great stuff. So let's get started. Well, here's a document with quite a few layers already. In fact, why don't I go ahead and pull this out a bit just so that we have a little more room to work on the stuff. Maybe resize it down here so we can see what's going on. Float a little bit. Okay, so we have lots of layers in this document, and actually you could have 100 layers. There are a lot more than just what you're seeing here. As you start composing your documents, it just depends on what you're trying to do with the effects. Now, the first and most important thing is, in order to work on a layer, it has to be selected. So as I'm clicking on these different names of the layers, it becomes an active or selected layer. Right now I have my type layer selected. In fact, let me use the visibility here, and you can see how I can turn it on and off. So you can see that that's the layer, it's active. And with my move tool as my active tool, it means that I can move this text anywhere I want within the frame. Now what's interesting is that when you try to move the horses, even though your mouse might be over those pixels, it's not moving it because it's not the active layer. You need to actually go and select the layer in order to affect that layer and move it. Let me go ahead and just undo, step backwards a little bit with the Control-Alt-Z to step backwards. One of the things that you can do with your move tool, the active tool, is you can actually select the layer by using your Control key and clicking on the pixels. So as I click and hold on the horses, then that becomes the active layer. Watch it, if I Control click on the text, that becomes the active layer on the shadow. I try right-clicking on the background layer, though, and it's not selecting. And there's something else going on with the background layer. It's actually locked. And that's because it is a background layer itself. The background is a special type of layer. And most images, when you scan them in or you take an image with a digital camera, it's going to create this flattened image. And the background layer is really this unstoppable area. Now we can easily change that by just renaming it. So if I double click on it, I could rename it layer 0, I could rename it background, I could rename it beach, whatever I want. I think it's helpful to have names that are meaningful. When you're naming this, you could also change the color. So for example, if it helps you to organize information, you can give it a color, and there's some options for the blending mode as well as the opacity. I'm going to leave those as default. But by simply renaming it so that it's no longer a background layer, it's no longer locked, and I can actually use my Control key to click on it, just as you see. Okay? And it's also, this one was blue, and if I right click, I can go in and change the color as well, or if I double click on the name, I can rename it. Incidentally, if you go back to your layer menu and you choose new, this is a way where you can make a new background from layer. Not that you would need to do that, but it's just a little FYI. Okay, so a couple more things about the locking and the visibility. With the visibility, obviously I can use my eyeball to show or hide. You could also just click and drag up or click and drag down to show and hide lots of options. So that's a handy little trick right there. And the lock, when I'm locking stuff, it's in the layers panel. We can see that we can lock information, and there's options to lock everything. Make sure this is my active layer first. There's options to lock everything, or you can do partial locks. And if you hover over, you can see that you can lock the transparent pixels, which means you can't change any pixels that are transparent, or you can lock the pixels that have imaging, meaning you can't change pixels that have paint in them, or you could lock the positioning of it. So let's try something here with this shadow, and I'll go ahead and lock the transparent pixels, and if I get my paintbrush and I start, let's make the larger paintbrush using my right bracket just to make it a little bit larger and see it, and if I paint, notice that right now it's not painting until I get into the shadow, and then it starts painting that shadow. It's hard to see because it's such a dark color. Let me go ahead and switch those colors here, and if I paint, you can really see that change. Let's go and undo a couple times. That's because we had the transparency locked. Just change that. And if we lock the image pixels, what you'll see here is as I start painting, and I can't paint here because I've got some items that are allowing me to not paint anything at all. So it's a little extra interesting tip and trick. Let's try with erasing, and you can see you can't erase it because the layers are locked. However, I can move it because I did not lock the position. Let's go ahead and undo. There we go. Might have to undo a couple times. Okay, just going back and forth in my history there with the control. I'm using these shortcuts for the step forward and step backward. Okay, well, one more thing, we'll go back here, and instead of locking our transparency or our image pixels or even the location, we could lock everything, and that way the shadow is protected. It can't move at all. I'm going to go ahead and unlock it, and now it's open. An interesting thing, too, about the shadow and the horses is they're intended to go together. And if I were to move the shadow, it doesn't quite fit with those horses, does it? And so you can actually select multiple layers in order to affect multiple layers. And I'm going to use my Shift key and click on the second layer here, and they're both selected. And now I can move them together as one unit. Now, by selecting them, they are going to work together, but as soon as I deselect, they go back to individual layers. So one thing you might want to do is to actually link these layers together. So I selected them both, clicked on the link button, and now they will always stay linked even if I deselect and come back to them. They're going to stay linked. In fact, this layer right here is an example of a layer with a mask, and you can see how the mask is linked to the image, and so it's going to make sure that you're always moving the mask and the image at the same time, and it helps with protecting and what's going to be showing, what's going to be hidden. So that's a nice tip and trick. Well, some other things that you can do with layers as far as putting them together is you can actually duplicate layers and delete layers and create new layers. So let's start with some options for duplicating. I've got this frame here, right? And I can actually just drag it down on top of the new icon, and it makes a duplicate for me. And with the duplicate, I could then move it. I could move it, or I could even nudge it, making sure the new move tool is my active tool. I'm using my arrows to just nudge it into place. Kind of a handy trick. And then I'm going to take the sunny days here, and I'm going to do some alignment. Now, in the Layers menu, you have some features called Align. And the Align works based on what layers are selected. So I'm going to go ahead and select the sunny days, and I'm going to select, by holding the Shift key, one of these frames. And if I use my Align, I can try something like bottom edge. You can see how it's lining. It's actually lining the very bottom ascender of the, or descender rather, of the Y. Go back here to Layer, Align, and I can line the right edges. I could also go ahead and just select the other frame. Whoops, let's try this again. Maybe I need to hold down my Control key. There we go. Hold down the Control, and I was able to bypass the one in the middle. I'll go here to Layer, Align, and we'll try the right edges. And it's changing some of that alignment in there. Okay. And you start experimenting, and you can make your changes. Well, as you start making these changes in here, another thing you may want to do is to link these multiple layers. Now, I could link them just like I did before by selecting all three of them with the Shift key, and the Shift is giving me a selection of range and linking them. The other option is to use a group command. Now, one thing I could do is I could create a group and then drag them in there. I'll just show you how you do that. Create the group and then drag them in. And that can be a nice option, but sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get them in the right spot. So what I like to do is to actually select them, and then I'm going to use my layer menu here. And with my layer menu, I can group or Control G, and it automatically groups them for me into this group or this folder set, so I don't have to move them. And now as they're grouped together, I can hide all of them together. I can lock all of them or unlock them. I can move them as a unit. But I can also go in and expand the items and move one item at a time. So I don't have to necessarily be always working on the group. I have some choices to work on them as I see fit. So I like that feature, just doing a little nudging there, etc. as you like it. And then you can easily change them. You can also double click and give it a name that you may find helpful for you. Another neat trick that you can do with layers is you can change the sizing of the layers, whether they're the layer bounds or the layer position. If I go ahead and right click, I can see it says clip thumbnails to layer bounds versus clip thumbnails to document bounds. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Here I can see the shadow relative to the entire canvas. Same thing with the boat. You can't really tell because there's this, boat is a smart object, so it's covering up, but it's relative to the whole canvas in here. And if I go ahead and change that to clip to layer bounds, I like this feature because it's actually, I think, easier to see the pixels, but it's not necessarily relative to the canvas, it's relative to the pixels itself that it's using. Okay, so we saw that we can group some layers and link some layers. You could also take a layer and drag it down to make a duplicate. This tool, not only does it let you make a duplicate, but if you simply click on it, let's go ahead and click on the beach here, I can create a brand new layer. And with the brand new layer, it allows me to paint. And I always think it's better to paint on a blank layer than on an existing layer, because if you paint on a blank layer, you can always delete it or change it, etc. I'm going to go ahead and just select all. Selects everything in there. And let's go and add a stroke, edit stroke, and we'll put in maybe something kind of big like 40, and we'll choose a color in here. How about black? Okay, and instead of the center, let's do the inside. It's going to bring it all the way in. Click on OK. And there's that stroke. Go ahead and deselect it. But again, I put this on a separate layer, on a new layer, so I can easily change it and remove it. You can also create what are called fill layers. So instead of just a blank layer, you can create fill layers. There's lots of different types. There's solid fills and gradients and patterns, and there's also different adjustment layers. But one of my favorites and most useful is a solid fill color layer. And I'm going to go ahead and click on there. Let's actually just change that, pull it down a little bit, create an interesting effect. Let's hide that. And now I can create a really different effect using that fill layer. It fills everything in there, and it has to do with the arrangement or the stack of the layer. You can see as I start moving that up, it starts changing what I can see. And that's really the heart and soul of these layers. Maybe I go ahead and hide that sailboat in there. Well, one little extra tip and trick about layers as you're working on them is that you can combine your layers or filter your layers depending on your needs. So let's start with the merging and the flattening. As you start working with layers, I like having my layers open as much as possible, but there are going to be instances, especially when you're doing certain types of filters and blurs, where you need to go in and either merge or flatten your layers. Now, flatten takes them all the way back down to a background. Let's go ahead and try that. And it flattens everything out and give you the warning about hidden layers are missing, and now all you see is one image and it's been turned into a background as if this was your original. Good thing there's undo. Go ahead and undo that. The other option you could do is you can merge layers. I'm going to go and hide some of this stuff. And I have right here these two layers that are linked together, and if I were going to be doing some type of filter effect, there may be a need to merge them, and I can merge the layers that are selected or merge layers that are visible. Here's what's selected, and you can see how it brings the horse and the shadow together. Now, as a rule of thumb, it's better to not merge those layers. One thing, though, is it does affect the size, so fewer layers means you have a smaller file size. But as a rule of thumb, I try not to affect those save those layers or merge them down unless absolutely necessary. It's really important, too, to preserve your layers, to always save your information. Save it as a Photoshop format, because when you save it as a Photoshop, it preserves all that great layer information. Now, the last thing here is a new feature that you can use when you're working with layers, and it has to do with the filtering. And right now, it's showing me all the layers, but imagine as you start increasing lots and lots of layers, that you may want some ways to quickly find information. And so you can actually do a sort, and here's one where you can sort by color. And remember that we made one of them blue, so I could sort it down and just see the layers that were blue or the layers that were no color at all. I could sort by kind and just see my type or some other types of images. And there's different ways that you could sort them. I'm just going to go ahead and show all my layers again. And just by removing it, I can now see everything that I wanted visible. I'll go ahead and put that layer panel back where it came from and expand it back out. So now I have all my layers just as before. And again, with my layers panel, with my layers menu, I have many ways of actually changing how I'm going to be working with those documents, selecting the layer or making that an active layer, and then using great tools to manipulate the components of my piece.